In tonight's Rewrite, the worst thing that could ever happen to Grover Norquist. There is a way for the Democrats to rewrite their legislative strategy that would ruin Grover's life's work and free every Republican in Congress from the dictatorial rule of Grover. The new Democratic strategy that will completely destroy Grover's power is simply these three words: off the cliff. Congressional Democrats should all get buttons made saying off the cliff, like, say, this one. Put bumper stickers on their cars saying off the cliff, so that when Republicans see the Democratic cars in the House and Senate garages, they'll start to think, hey, maybe the Democrats are finally serious this time. Now, I know it sounds crazy to go off a cliff. It sounds reckless. It sounds downright Republican to have a legislative strategy that says, let's just go off a cliff. That was the Tea Party strategy in the House on the debt ceiling. They were willing to go off the cliff by refusing to raise the debt ceiling. But the cliff I'm talking about is different. This time, the only responsible thing to do is go off the cliff. A fiscal cliff was written into law last year in the bill that raised the debt ceiling. It says that if Congress and the president do not agree on $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction by New Year's Eve, then budget cuts amounting to $1.2 trillion will go into effect on January 1st, and half of those cuts will be in defense spending. Here's what the cliff looks like. Here it is for non-defense spending on January 1st. Goes down $600 billion. No one in either party wants to see this happen, because this includes education spending, infrastructure spending, everything except Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And even Tea Party members of Congress have some spending in there that they want to protect. Congress has never seen spending cuts like this before. A big, crude cut where Congress can't control exactly what is going to be cut where and by how much. And here is what the defense spending cliff looks like on January 1st. Some Democrats might be okay with us going off this cliff on defense spending. I, for one, would have no problem with it. But no Republican wants to see us go off the cliff on defense spending. Congressional Republicans are already in a bit of a panic about the defense spending cliff, and that's why they had Dick Cheney come up to see them yesterday. Dick Cheney was there not as a former vice president giving them presidential campaign advice. He was there as a former defense secretary telling them how disastrous it would be, in his view, for us to go off this cliff of defense spending, and what they would need to desperately try to do immediately to protect and defense spending if we do go off that cliff. But there's something else at the edge of the New Year's Eve cliff that Republicans fear even more than the defense spending cuts. And this is the good news, the great news about the fiscal cliff. And it is the worst thing that could ever happen to Grover Norquist. And that is the complete and final expiration of all the Bush tax cuts. There has always been an expiration date on the Bush tax cuts, and on New Year's Eve, it will finally arrive. And if Democrats just have the courage to hold hands and jump off that cliff together, every income tax rate will go up on January 1st. Not just the top rate, but the bottom rates and the middle rates. All of the tax rates go up, straight up, on January 1st. Now, the Democrats don't want to see that happen either. They only want to see the top tax rates go up. But the Republicans are never going to allow them to pass a bill increasing the top tax rates. Never. The Republicans have proven that they mean that. Democrats now have the chance to prove that they are just as unyielding as Grover Norquist is, and the only way the Democrats can do that is by going off the cliff and letting all the tax rates go right up on January 1st, every one of them, because then the tax bill that the Democrats will reintroduce, the Democrats' bill then that they'll be trying to pass, it's now a tax increase that they're trying to pass it now, and it's a tax increase because what it does is it raises this year the top income tax brackets. Next year, on January 1st, if all the brackets have gone up, that very same bill, introduced with the very same rates, suddenly becomes a tax cut. A tax cut on all of the brackets except the top brackets. And so then, the vote they will be asking Republicans to cast in the House and the Senate after we go off the cliff in January will not be a vote to simply increase the top tax rate. It will be a vote to decrease all of the other tax rates right back to where they are now. And according to their pledge to Grover Norquist, all Republicans must vote for the Democratic tax bill then because it is a tax cut and for most brackets and a tax increase. It's not a tax increase at all for the top bracket. The Grover Norquist pledge will require them to vote for the Democratic tax bill in January. A couple of Democrats in the Senate started whispering this to me a few weeks ago, that they believed that the only way to win this fight with the Republicans was to first, on New Year's Eve, go off the cliff. And now, some Republicans in the secretly reasonable Senate Republicans, a small handful of them in the Senate, have secretly let it be known across the aisle that they are hoping we go off the cliff on New Year's Eve because then they can not only vote for the president's tax policy in January, they can vote for it without breaking their pledge to Grover Norquist. In fact, it will keep their pledge to Grover Norquist. As I said, if we go off the cliff in January, the pledge to Grover will require all Republicans to vote for the president's tax bill because it will then be a cut of most income tax brackets. The Treasury Department is right now making plans for what will happen on the tax withholding tables on your first paycheck in January after we go off the cliff and all the income tax rates go up. The strategists at the White House and the Treasury and the Democratic leadership in Congress believe that if we go off the cliff, they will then be able to pass the Democratic bill that cuts all of the tax rates back to where they are now, except those top tax rates. And they'll be able to do that in a matter of days. The Tax Writing Committee in the Senate knows how to do this virtually instantaneously, so nothing can give the Democrats more power over tax policy than going off the cliff. You might see a few more bucks withheld from your January paycheck, maybe your first paycheck, but when Congress then quickly passes a bill restoring your old tax rate, that January tax money will be refunded to you. Congressional Democrats are going to need courage to do this because it's a bold strategy, and boldness isn't exactly their style. And so tonight, the last word. Off the Cliff campaign begins. Call, email, tweet your members of Congress and tell them you want them to go off the cliff and you're ready to hold hands and go off the cliff with them, even if it means a few more bucks withheld from your January paycheck, because this time, doing the thing that sounds crazy, that sounds reckless, going off the cliff, is the only way to restore sanity and fairness in taxation, and it's the only way to end the dictatorial rule of Grover Norquist.